February 24th, 2022. A date that will be remembered for generations to come. A date etched in memory, marking the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter in modern history. The world watched in disbelief as Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border. Shockwaves reverberated globally, shaking the very foundations of international order. The unthinkable had happened. War in Europe. A sovereign nation invaded, its cities turned into battlegrounds overnight. It felt like a relic of the past, a nightmare returning. The echoes of history were deafening, reminding us of the fragility of peace. The initial days were a blur of confusion and fear. People scrambled for safety, unsure of what the next moment would bring. Air raid sirens pierced the air. Cities braced for bombardment, their residents huddling in basements and shelters. Images of fleeing families flooded news feeds. Parents clutching their children, carrying whatever they could, seeking refuge from the chaos. Please remember to like and subscribe for more content. Also comment on who is the villain. Back to the show, the world held its breath, uncertain of what lay ahead. Every news update brought a mix of dread and hope. The invasion shattered any illusion of peace. Smoke and rubble replaced the once bustling streets. It exposed the fragility of global security. The international community was forced to confront the stark reality of aggression. Putin's actions drew condemnation from world leaders. Statements of solidarity and promises of support echoed across the globe. But words seemed hollow in the face of tanks and airstrikes. The reality on the ground was brutal and unrelenting. This wasn't a border skirmish, it was a full-scale invasion. The scale and intensity of the conflict were unprecedented in recent times. And it had begun with a chillingly familiar narrative, a narrative of power, control, and the age-old quest for dominance. Putin's justifications for the special military operation, as he termed it, were multifaceted. He spoke of denazification and demilitarization, painting Ukraine's government as a Nazi-sympathizing regime. This narrative, widely disputed, resonated with a domestic audience steeped in historical narratives of Russian greatness and victimhood. Another key justification was NATO expansion. Putin saw Ukraine's potential NATO membership as a direct threat to Russian security. He framed the invasion as a preemptive measure, a necessary evil to prevent the Western military alliance from encroaching further eastwards. These justifications, however, were met with skepticism and outright rejection by the international community.
And action.
In the face of this aggression, a new hero emerged: Volodymyr Zelensky. A comedian-turned-president, Zelensky defied expectations. He refused to flee Kiev, choosing instead to stand with his people. His nightly addresses, delivered with a mix of defiance and vulnerability, resonated across the globe. Zelensky's transformation from entertainer to wartime leader captured the world's imagination. He became a symbol of Ukrainian resistance. His courage in the face of danger, his refusal to back down, galvanized international support for Ukraine. The world rallied behind the underdog, inspired by Zelensky's unwavering spirit. The West, led by the United States, responded to the invasion with a barrage of sanctions. These sanctions targeted Russia's financial institutions, oligarchs, and key industries. The goal was to cripple the Russian economy and pressure Putin to change course. In addition to sanctions, the West provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in military and humanitarian aid. Javelin anti-tank missiles, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, and other weaponry flowed into the country, bolstering Ukraine's defenses. This support, while crucial for Ukraine's war effort, also risked escalating the conflict and drawing NATO into a direct confrontation with Russia. Section 5. Economic repercussions, a tale of two nations. The sanctions imposed on Russia had a significant impact on the country's economy. The ruble plummeted in value, inflation soared, and many Western companies withdrew from the Russian market. However, Russia proved more resilient than many experts initially predicted. Putin's government implemented countermeasures such as capital controls and import substitution to mitigate the impact of sanctions. Russia also leveraged its energy exports, particularly to China and India, to offset losses elsewhere. Meanwhile, Ukraine's economy was devastated by the war. Infrastructure was destroyed, industries crippled, and millions of people were displaced. Section 6. Putin's Gambit, playing the long game. Putin's strategy in Ukraine appeared to be based on a long-game calculation. He was not merely reacting to immediate events but was thinking several steps ahead, much like a chess grandmaster. His moves were deliberate, calculated, and aimed at achieving long-term objectives. He seemed willing to absorb significant economic pain in the short term, betting that the West's resolve would eventually crumble. The sanctions imposed by Western nations were severe, but Putin believed that Russia could weather the storm better than his adversaries anticipated. His nuclear rhetoric, while alarming, served as a deterrent, making Western leaders wary of escalating the conflict. By brandishing the nuclear card, he introduced a level of uncertainty that made direct confrontation with Russia a far more daunting prospect. Putin also sought to exploit divisions within the West, playing on concerns about energy prices and war fatigue. The energy crisis in Europe, exacerbated by the conflict, created a fertile ground for dissent and division among Western allies. His cultivation of relationships with China, India, and other non-aligned countries provided Russia with diplomatic cover and economic lifelines. These alliances were crucial in mitigating the impact of Western sanctions and in maintaining a semblance of normalcy in Russia's international relations. Putin's gamble, while risky, was not without its logic. He was playing a high-stakes game, where the rewards could be substantial if his calculations proved correct. He was playing a weak hand, but he played it shrewdly. In the end, the success of his strategy would depend on his ability to outlast his opponents and to turn short-term sacrifices into long-term gains. Section 7: Shifting Sands, the geopolitical landscape. The war in Ukraine had profound geopolitical repercussions. Finland and Sweden, long neutral countries, abandoned their non-alignment policies and joined NATO. This expansion of the Western military alliance was a major strategic setback for Putin. The conflict also exacerbated existing geopolitical fault lines. The US and its allies became more entrenched in their support for Ukraine, while Russia drew closer to China and other countries wary of Western hegemony. The war accelerated the trend towards a more multipolar world order, with the US and its allies facing growing challenges to their dominance. Section 8: The Diplomatic Front. A glimmer of hope? As the war dragged on, diplomatic efforts to end the fighting gained momentum. US President Trump, seeking a swift resolution to the conflict, initiated direct talks with Putin. These negotiations, while shrouded in secrecy, offered a glimmer of hope. Zelensky, for his part, expressed willingness to explore a negotiated settlement. He acknowledged the need for compromise, hinting at the possibility of Ukraine adopting a neutral status. However, key issues such as territorial integrity and security guarantees remained major stumbling blocks. Section 9: The Villain's Mirror, a question of perspective. The question of who is the villain in the Ukraine conflict is complex and multifaceted. It is not merely a black and white issue but rather a tapestry woven with threads of history, politics, and human suffering. Putin's invasion was a clear violation of international law and resulted in immense suffering. The images of destroyed cities and displaced families are a stark reminder of the human cost of this conflict. His justifications, widely disputed, did little to justify the bloodshed. Claims of protecting Russian-speaking populations and countering NATO expansion were met with skepticism and condemnation from the international community. Zelensky, on the other hand, emerged as a symbol of resistance, defending his country against an unprovoked attack. His leadership galvanized not only his nation but also garnered widespread support from around the world. However, the conflict is not a simple morality tale of good versus evil. The narratives are complex and the lines between right and wrong are often blurred. Geopolitical realities, historical grievances, and strategic miscalculations played a role in shaping the crisis. The echoes of past conflicts and the ambitions of present-day leaders have all contributed to the current situation. The West's actions, while well-intentioned, also contributed to the escalation of tensions. Sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic maneuvers, though aimed at curbing aggression, sometimes had the opposite effect, further entrenching positions. Ultimately, the villain's mantle is a heavy one, and assigning blame requires a nuanced understanding of the complex factors at play. It is a reminder that in the theater of international relations, there are rarely clear-cut heroes or villains, only perspectives shaped by a myriad of influences.